I was born very near to my mother. That's a joke, pause. Now, I was born in Yorkshire, capital of Yorkshire. You can't get much more northern than York. Very proud of it. It's funny you should mention that, because it occurred to me the other day. It was, my first vivid memory, I must have been 2. I've worked out that I must have been only 2, when my parents showed me my new, 2 years younger, sister in her cot. Wow. So my memory is looking through these, brown wood bars into, and look at your little sister as a baby, my sister Sue. So I must have been, she was new, I must have been only 2. That's my earliest memory, and it's a fond one. Where and how did I grow up? Well, according to my parents, because I wasn't, old enough to have memories as a baby, but it was the basement flat, and it suffered rats. And one day my mother found a rat in my cot, snuggling up towards my throat. She panicked a little bit. I don't remember this. I was there, but I wasn't really conscious. I was a baby. So they quickly moved out because of, thanks to York City Council, they got a council house. Whoa! And that's where they took me, and then that's where the next sibling was born. And it was great. 174 Thoresby Road, I will never forget it. Council house, brilliant. Yes, I would love to tell you more of my parents, because my dad Bernard and my mother Alice were fantastic for me. You probably want to know what on earth they did. They were born in the 1920s. So, they were in their 30s when I was born, etc. Normal thing, but it means that they, lived through the war and stuff. But we were, not a rich family, but not a jobless family. We were at the normal bottom end of things, living in a council house. My father worked in a factory as a fitter for Armstrongs, who made shock absorbers, etc. So he worked in the factory job. And my mother, when the children could just about survive without her for a few hours, worked in the local newsagents behind the counter. So shop worker mum and factory worker dad. That was where I come from. They were both brilliant and wonderful parents. Which of them was more strict? In those days, back in the 1950s, it was fairly normal, it's not normal these days, not counted as normal, to smack your child if the child does wrong. The naughty step hadn't been invented then, and it was still kind of received folk wisdom that if the child does something wrong, you say, I'm telling you off and I'm smacking your bottom. So I did get smacked bottom sometimes, and it was about equal between the mother and the father. These days, if I had smacked in the 80s and 90s any of my children with physical slap on bottom, I think I'd be thrown out of the country. But in those days, it was normal. I was smacked on my bottom several times by both of them, but they were both wonderful parents. We used to love our holidays. I mean, they were so special. These days, you wouldn't count it as special because it's not flying like I have since to, St. Lucia and then Hawaii and Kenya and stuff. But in those days, going on holiday, which was just as happy for us children, was I lived in York. We went to Scarborough for the day, Filey, and stayed a week in a thing called a hotel. Wow! To Whitby, fantastic. fantastic, to Robin Hood's Bay, all of the coastal Yorkshire places with beaches, etc. And sometimes we would just stay in a caravan, sometimes it would just be a day visit, but the really, really special ones were when we actually paid to live somewhere, the four of us, Mum, Dad, me and Sue, paid somewhere. Oh, £5 a night to stay within reach of the beach. Within reach of the beach. I like that sound. So, yeah, my early holidays were those. Yorkshire coast. As a child, I was a bit sort of, vague. Interested in practically everything. Wow, oof, I'd be not turned off by, oh, not interested in that. So, oh, wow. So, I was kind of interested in everything. I don't think I was a difficult kid for my parents. I was, middling, average person for your kids, average little boy for the kids. So, yeah, that's about it. That's me. My grandparents were a big, thing in my life at the time. One of each. Let me explain. On my mother's side, there was a grandfather alive, granddad. On my father's side, there was only a mother alive, grandma, or as we say in Yorkshire, nan. So they didn't even know each other, but one granddad, one grandma, nan. And, Grandad was very bolshy. Maybe I've inherited a bit of that, but he was very bolshy. Everybody knew that. We visited him. He came from County Durham. That's where he lived and was brought up, etc. So we often went up to County Durham to see him. But amazing, the earliest times that I went to see him, guess how you turned a light on in the living room in order to be able to converse and have a meal? Guess how you turned on the light? By putting me up with a match to light the gas candle. Oh, what were my favourite toys or games? Wow, that takes me back. The first answer is my train set, as we all called it. Most of us boys at school had train sets which your parents had bought for you. The kind of mechanical thing in your room where a train goes around a track that you've made, and then you also make little houses to go by it and little models of trees to go by it. It's called a train set. That was the absolutely wonderfulest thing that me and millions of other boys in the 1950s had as their big present when they were little. At school, I took a shine to it. I really enjoyed it. And at infant school, I must have had 4 teachers over 4 years, I think, but only one sticks in my memory as one of my favourite people in the world. She was called Mrs. Pease. Spelled, I think, P-E-A-S, although I hadn't learnt spelling by then. Anyway, I must have seen her name written a few times. She was brilliant and definitely brought us all on to be better kids at school. So I'm trying to think about what I was aspiring to when I was a child and whether I had any role models. I think my dad was my role model. I just wanted to do like he did. That'll do. At some point when I was a child, Christmas comes round and they give you something. And one day I got 2 things. And I was actually agonizing. I was aged 10. I was agonizing over, the normal thing before then was you get 1 biggie as a present, and a few smallies like chocolates. And I got 2 biggies. And I thought, which one is the biggie? And the 2 were the following: the game Monopoly and a Timex watch for my wrist. Both on the same day. And Daddy, which is my main present? They're both your main present. Thank you. I think when I grew up, I so liked animals that I wanted to be a vet. But the pathway that my education took me and that my qualifications took me just didn't lean in that way. I really wish that there was a way to kind of live a life twice. Once the way that I did, which was brilliant, fine, fantastic, and once, plan B, the vet. That would also be fantastic. But, some people are lucky enough to do one and then the other. No, I'd like to do, the whole of the one and then the whole of the other. But vet is my answer. I was lucky enough to go to university. Thank you, York, for putting me through a thing called a grammar school in those days and then bouncing me up to university. And I was very happy to have done that. You can't have a better 3 or 4 years in your life in many ways than your time at university, even though you're slightly in debt and not easy to make ends meet, but wow, the kind of people you're with. I loved university, and I think what I did was modern languages. I just loved words, and so that was the kind of thing that I got enough A-levels in, and they took me on into you won't have heard of it, but Keble College, Oxford. They took me on there, and I did languages for 4 years, which included. If you do history, you don't get this. Pause. If you do languages, you extend your course at university from 3 years to 4 years because you spend the third year in France or Germany being an assistant anglais, teaching. And of course you live there and you learn more. Of all the subjects I could have done, the one that extended it from 3 years to 4 years with a brilliant stay in France, couldn't have improved on that, mate. So we're talking here about my work experience and what jobs I had, but of course being a student, especially in those days, you did lots of jobs in your spare time. I built a wall for somebody, not a householder, but at agricultural college at Askham Bryan, where they were just touting around for people. In fact, I can't resist telling you that the day I arrived at the agricultural college looking for some kind of just employment pay for the 6 or 8 weeks that I was going to be away from university to get a bit of this, he said, "Here's a hoe and there's a field. Hoe the field." Yeah, start there and keep going. That was, I think I quit that job after 2 weeks because I couldn't take it anymore. And then, a practice job at this and a practice job at that. So I had various jobs. But if what we're trying to do is establish what the hell I went on to do after university, I went into market research at a very famous firm called British Market Research Bureau. One of the reasons that BMRB was famous is that at the time they did the music charts, number 1 to number 20, etc. BMRB was it, and I was there. Well, the wonderful lady called Teresa, who became my wife, it's been quite an interesting saga. I think I'm supposed to be talking at this time about how you met, etc. It was at an industry party, between my ad agency people and her market research people. They throw these parties in order to get the advertising people to hire them more as that. So we were in that, and there was a big moment where I talked to lots of their staff, but there was a moment when she claimed that she knew about wines. And she said, "There's even a Chateau Smith." I broke out laughing. There cannot be a Chateau Smith. But next day, on my desk, was a bottle of wine called Chateau Smith to prove she was right and to keep the connection going. Then, we met up, had a drink, etc. had a relationship for a while, got married and had kids. So, but the first meeting was to do with Chateau Smith. Well, that romantic relationship that I had for years with the lady who became my wife, and we had 4 children together, Teresa, I proposed to her and she said yes. The proposal, this is not going to be one of your most interesting answers, was actually in bed. And I thought, wow, and hey, I think we ought to get married. And she said, she gave me a big hug and said, yes. So, after proposing to Teresa and her saying yes and a big hug after it, that's a positive yes, we got married in May of 1990. And I remember it very well. It was only 4 or 5 months ahead from my proposal and her yes. So we only had 4 or 5 months to do it, but we did it. It was great. I couldn't have asked for a better one. There was a church, there was a reception area, there were lots of friends, there was a best man and an even better man. I could tell you that story, but the best man was not very good at doing best man stuff. So somebody else stepped in, and I called him my even better man, and he enjoyed it. My children were joys, every single one as they arrived. The sheer joy of if I'm about 38 at the time, that kind of thing, but the sheer joy of, and here's a baby. Oh wow! Of course, the tricky bit is what on earth are you going to call them? Okay, so the first one was a female, so I called her. Well, obviously, my wife had to agree, but I think this one was my choice. Emma. And then Roscow. So she's Emma, my surname, Roscow. What do you put in the middle? Emma Louise. You know why? Because Emmylou Harris was very big at the time. So if you're going to collapse together the two names, Emma and Louise, you're going to get Emmylou, which is, so that's why Louise came along. The next one was James, after my grandfather. The next one was Nick, because one of my best friends from the past had been a Nicholas and called Nick, and it's a good name. And then there was Tom, and that one was Teresa's choice. I'm trying to think back to family holidays, with my parents, and most of the time our holidays were just, 30 miles away on the coast of Yorkshire, Scarborough, Filey, Whitby, Robin Hood's Bay. Most of our holidays were just around there. That was normal. But one time, the parents decided to do something different and took us all, the 4 of us, to Margate, which is way, way down south, hundreds of miles away. And during that holiday, what stuck out in my mind is we went to a thing called, I think, Cliftonville. Still sticks in my mind. I must have been 8 at the time. Sticks in my mind as a model small village. And you could wander around it and look at all the buildings. It was just a city made small. Wow. That sticks in my mind to this day. I remember lots of holidays that I had with my, family, wife and kids, 4 kids. So there were some big ones. And I do remember that we used to go to, a place, club something or other, which had events for little children. And we went there and did that. So the kids could play their, little volleyball thing for kids. And I could go and play boule, the French thing. And you also met other people just like you who were parents there with little kids. So it was, very engaging in terms of meeting people. And it was great. I always wanted children. I'm not alone in that. Lots of people want children. So I really, really wanted children, which is why eventually I kind of got married and settled down in order to have children. And we had 4 of them. Oh, the lovely Emma, James, Nikki, and Tom. We did, various moments and things. The one that sticks out in my mind is teaching each of the 4, one at a time, to ride a bike. Because there are some funny aspects to that. Obviously, you have to find a place where they can roll around on the bike, etc. And but one of the nicest things is you had to lie to them, because I remember for each of them, it happened every time that the child, let's go with the first one for the moment, Emma. You say, look, I'm holding the saddle so you can't fall over. And you pedal forward, and don't worry, I'll keep you upright. And then, worried, she would say, Daddy, you still holding the saddle? And I go, yeah, I am, yeah. But a few minutes later, Daddy, you still holding the saddle? While I'm 10 yards behind. So I'm afraid the answer is, no, I'm not. You're doing it on your own. But you're doing it on your own. It worked well. So one of the things I most loved about teaching the kids was tons of, homework and all tons and tons. But the thing that sticks out in my mind is teaching them to ride a bike. I think I've always been searching for new knowledge and stuff. That's what helped me get through school, university, etc. That kind of, I loved this stuff of learning, rather than, I have to learn even more. No, I was definitely pro learning more stuff. And I think that's more or less stayed with me now. As for my hobbies and special interests, the biggest of them is that I really love board games. I don't mean on the screen time, these, this century stuff of board. I mean board games. Started with Monopoly, and then Risk and Apocalypse and stuff. 4 of you sit around a table, and there's a board in front, and you all play to the best of your ability, and you see who wins. The absolute essence of board games. I was so into that I did 2 things. One is that I started inventing my own ones from the age 11 upwards. And 2, once I moved to London and had a bit of time off, I started a club so people come round and play these games with me. By these games, let's say 3/4 of the time we play an existing board game off the shelf that has already been invented by somebody. But 1/4 of the time we play something I've just invented. I think you can imagine that I get double pleasure out of that, playing it and playing one of mine. What I'm going to leave to my children, most importantly of things, I might leave them various things, but the games I invented are one of the biggest things that I wish to leave to all of my children to pass on to their grandchildren, etc. Now that I'm 67 and, already old or heading towards it, one gets a mixture of thoughts. The mixture of thoughts is, hey, I'm glad I got here. You can look at, past people who are heroes of yours who, died in their prime at 38 or 47 or 61. So I'm very happy to be, still here and doing this thing. But it's not as easy as it used to be because, I don't have, all of my talents are slightly degraded by now. So everything I used to do brilliantly before, I do almost brilliantly now, and I don't enjoy the fact that my faculties, such as those, inventiveness, etc., writing abilities, I don't enjoy the fact that they are slightly going down year by year. My plans for the future can't exist for, they can't take into account an awful lot of years ahead, because who knows, by the time you're 67, you've got to think, and what if the bad thing happened tomorrow? So it's very hard to make plans. I've tried to make plans by telling my children what I want them to accept and what I want them to pass on to my grandchildren. That's about it. I just want to organize who does what after I'm gone. What I'm looking forward to now is for, my current way of life to, last a few more years rather than get cut short. Because I do a lot of, having people around to play games and having, going out sometimes and writing my novels and things. What I would like is more years mainly sitting at home doing those things still. Of course, everybody like me has difficult times, and I've had a few, and if you're pressing me, I would say that one of the most difficult times was when I split up with my first long-term girlfriend. I'm just being honest there, so that. But the other difficult times are when each of my parents died, because things don't get much harder than that. I think I've been very lucky in my life, and there aren't many things that I would make a change to in the past, except perhaps losing that first 7-year long girlfriend relationship, my fault. So, I sometimes think back to that and think, I threw it all away, in the words of Bob Dylan. So, I threw it all away somehow. Okay, I do revisit that sometimes, but on the whole, if I look back, I'd say, I had a lucky ride. I seemed to do the right thing accidentally most of the time, and life treated me well. I can't complain now. So we're now talking about turning points in my life. And I think that one of the biggest turning points was a thing which is, it's kind of collects opprobrium now as a bad thing. But the thing called 11 plus, which I took in, 1963 when I was 11? And it sorted you into 3/4 of you go to a thing called a secondary modern, and 1/4 of you go to a thing called a grammar school. These days it's frowned upon as, dividing people at the age of 11 into will do well and will do badly. Yeah, to be honest, I'm not sure I could defend it, but these days. But, for me and my lifestyle, the fact that I came out of a, group of, me, family, sister, cousins, etc., nobody passed their 11 plus, except I did. Oh, what? It's like, it was the equivalent in my council estate area of, it's the equivalent of, he's just gone to Eton. No, he's passed his 11 plus and is going to grammar school. Well, they taught me extremely well there. I had fantastic friends. I adored the place, and it pushed me on to do A-levels, and it pushed me on to get into Oxford and get a degree and get a good job. So I would say the key crucial point was the 11 plus, which I took at age 11. We've moved on to talking about cars. Cars have been a big part of my life. Remember, being born in 1952, most families did not have a car. The majority did not have a car. It was pretty rare at the time. But my parents, one day, my father turned up with an Austin A40 car. I must have been about 12 at the time. You mean we have a car? wow, it's like we joined the upper class or something, and it meant that we could go for a day out to Scarborough. Oh wow, what a difference. It was huge. So the Austin A40 that my father got when I was about 12 is my hero car. So with my father having introduced our family to, hey, we're a family with a car, that's as big as a family with a television. Whoa, those are big things. A family with a washing machine. Ho, boy, were we doing well. Cool. So my father had various cars, and he taught me to drive. And by that time, he, got rid of the Austin A40 and had a Cortina, another really famous, iconic car from the past, a Ford Cortina. He had a Ford Cortina, and he taught me to drive on it by taking me to the aerodrome. So you can say, I accelerated, not on the roads, on the aerodrome, when I was between school and university. I took the test and failed it. I came back from the first term of university. Dad gave me a few more goes. I took the test again and I passed. So at age 18, I had passed my test in my dad's Ford Cortina. Fantastic. I'm really glad that I grew up for, 18 years in Yorkshire. And York, it's a fantastic place. I feel very lucky to have been brought up there. Not only a fantastic city where if you go for a walk, it just looks great, etc. But also, it has that northern thing. I don't want to be negative about southerners, but it kind of had that northern, I'll leave your back door open so a neighbour can come in and say hello. It's that kind of openness. And yeah, I think that Yorkshire at the time kind of had that, and York especially, because it was a kind of slightly smaller place. There's only 100 to 150,000 people living there, even though it had been the capital of England once, so it had all the castles and stuff. It was great to live in, but I really enjoyed that there was, I don't know, they must have this in other places, but I enjoyed it also in my place, that, neighbours helped neighbours, kids came down the street and played, we all played together. It felt like a really good place to grow up in now. Sue was my sister, 2 years younger than me, and I might have already mentioned that one of my earliest memories is, hey, you've got a young sister. Look through the bars of this cot and you'll see a baby, and that's your sister. I was 2 at the time. Did I understand the word sister? Don't know. But wow, was it very powerful. It's my earliest memory. And Sue is great. She's been a friend of mine now for 65 years. She's very, very good, and I think she's, happy in what she does, and she's great. And I think she's my best friend. It could have gone different because, I went to grammar school and she went to secondary modern. So, we could have kind of gone slightly sideways from each other, but we didn't. Sometimes I helped her, she tells me now, with her homework. Because, I was 2 years ahead of her and was, reasonably bright. And she would help me with, just being upbeat and happy. So she was great. And she's still one of the best friends I have on the earth. If I had a message for my children, that they're only going to see in 20 years' time, I think it might be a repeat of what I told them when they were teenagers. I played them Rod Stewart's Forever Young. And I explained that what a parent can wish their child is, and may you stay forever young. And I would say, I gave this to you when you were teenagers. Give it to your children when they're teenagers. And tell them to give it to their children when they're teenagers. And if I'm really lucky, you will say this idea is thanks to Dad, Grandad, Great-Grandad, Bob. I've thought about this posterity for my grandchildren bit, what people might remember me for a few times recently. Now that I'm in my late 60s, you do tend to think of, what do I leave behind? Do I leave behind an attic full of rubbish that they have to sort? Or do I, pick and choose and say, I wish you would have this? And the biggest thing that crops up for me is that the 10 or 12 games I have invented, which are just, scribbles on sheets and bits here and there, I would like to leave to my children and grandchildren full boxed copies of those games, because I think that's the most productive thing I've done, and a thing that my grandchildren, when they're old enough to play board games, will say, oh, and Grandad made this one? Ha ha! Oh, that makes me happy in advance.